up annually, and they pair a trip to the Wolf Center with a trip into the Boundary Waters, and they spend 2 days at the Wolf Center doing programming, and they also do medical drawing using our animals and our exhibit, and it's tremendous work that they do.
What college?
I knew somebody was going to ask that, and I have it right on the side of my computer, right there. But I don't want to get it wrong, but it might be Iowa State, but I'm not 100% certain on that. But we're actually looking. One of the possibilities for our temporary exhibit space is possibly using some of their drawings in that space to highlight our educational role and what it plays with other groups and organizations. Dean Beekler is the professor. I don't know if anybody might know him, but he's been coming up here for years apparently. Well, so yes, from Duluth. Actually, Twin Cities schools still come up this way, but much less apparently than they did, 5-10 years ago. And again, we all know that has to do with educational budgeting. And you put a group of students on a bus to go anywhere, and even if it's only a little ways, you're talking $400 to $600 without even thinking about it. And that's why we're really excited about our video conferencing programs, because for a fraction of that, you can get an experience without having the challenges of the field trips. And you don't have to have parents sleeping on floors with students and that sort of thing. So.
Can you speak to the philosophy or the ideology of involving children in nature? I have read, over the last several months, things about how kids nowadays are they're indoors all the time. They're playing with electronics and they're not outdoors. So for those of us here to benefit the young people in our lives, but also just in general, what do we lose when kids aren't outdoors?
Well, I think
society?
Absolutely, and my assumption is, and somebody shake your head at me if this is wrong, is that In the Woods by Lou. Tremendous book, and he coined the term, or someone did, and he used it, nature deficit disorder. And I truly believe in that concept, whether or not it's a diagnosed disorder. I think we lose creativity. We lose the framework for understanding that will allow students and young people to create connections, not only with nature, but with one another and with larger concepts. I think we lose problem-solving ability, because the idea of free play in nature is tremendously important. Because my son has built now 15 different forts in the backyard where we're living, and he'll come to me like, oh, I can't do this, I can't figure it out. I'm like, well, spend some time actually trying to figure it out. And the next thing I look up, and he's got limbs hanging over, and he's got all this other stuff, and he's piled up things, and he figures that out. And I think problem solving doesn't happen in front of a computer screen when you're playing games. Now, there are educational possibilities and collaborative efforts in using technology to do that, and we really support that. But I think you lose a whole bunch of stuff. The other thing, and this is my little sort of approach to educating students in the outdoors, and I think a number of you have been or are teachers and may disagree with me on this. But a long time ago, I asked somebody, we'd go out and I'd take kids out, and I had a good friend who taught me a lot about being an environmentalist or a naturalist, and he knew every plant name, every tree name, every animal name, the scientific name for all that, and I got to be honest, I don't. Okay, and so maybe that drives my philosophy. But what I think is important is that we encourage the sense of exploration that being out in the woods or out in nature naturally does for kids. And so, when we see a track and a kid says, oh, it's a wolf track, what's the correct response there? No, it isn't. Or could be. Or I don't really know. I may have the need to feel like I'm an expert and be able to say, no, that's obviously a coyote track for these 3 reasons. But if every time a kid makes a guess or a hypothesis, to use scientific terms, we tell them no, they're wrong, how long will it take to get them unexcited about being outdoors with you? And so I think that's key, that understanding and having that knowledge is important, but how we share it and how we choose to engage students and kids in the outdoors is really key. But that's my opinion. a long answer to a short question, sorry. Any other questions kind of about center stuff? I'm going to talk just for a couple minutes about wolf management sorts of things and updates and anything you'd like, but if there's other stuff that's up. All right. So I think one of the things that I've heard or seen about this group, and politics aside, is that the idea is that we need a place to engage in rational, logical conversation about tough issues. And whether or not it's healthcare, whether or not it's education, whatever it is, it's absolutely the case that we have to take people from very different belief systems, ideologies, and have a legitimate conversation and come to some agreement or some plan. And I think wolf management is one of those areas. It is extremely challenging to have, different groups on extremely different sides sit down and have a conversation that has an outcome that we can move forward with. Okay, and so I think at the same time as residents or members of this country, we're asking for that. Many of us are hoping that happens. We get to do that at the International Wolf Center every day. As many of you know, we don't take a specific stand on wolf management decisions. So to list, delist, relist, we're not going to come out and publicly make a statement on which one we think is appropriate. Some people value that and understand why we do that. Some people really wish we'd become more of an advocacy group. We believe that by educating and putting out the information, the best science-based, as objective information as information can be, that we put that in front of people, people will make informed decisions, and it will have a positive impact on wolf population survival. So that's where we see our role, is trying to engage people in that conversation, bring people from different backgrounds and beliefs, and engaging conversations. So regionally, in the Great Lakes region, wolves are still protected by the Endangered Species Act, so they're listed currently. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, back in September, put out what they call an initial finding and asked for 90 days of comment, or allowed for 90 days of comment from the public about whether or not they would move towards delisting the gray wolf in the Great Lakes region. That period just ended on November 15th. As of this moment, nothing's been put out. That's not surprising. They usually allow a little bit of time, a few extra days for comments to roll in, and then they summarize those comments and they'll release their statement of what their next step is going to be. All right, so that's something that we can be looking for in the news in the next few days or the next few weeks, probably. Currently, and again, I apologize if some of you know this better than I do even, Minnesota has about 3,000 wolves, Wisconsin has about 700 wolves, and Michigan has about 600 wolves. Those are pretty good estimates based on the sciences that we know. Earlier this summer, over in Michigan, there were wolves that were spotted and tracked in the lower peninsula of Michigan. So that up until this point, they'd been in the upper peninsula, and most likely, there had been a stray wolf and that sort of thing. But they believe that the wolf population has actually made the move down to the lower peninsula. So that's pretty interesting. It'll be something to watch now, what happens to that population down there, and see how far south and how far east it goes. Northern Rockies management is back in the hands of the Fish and Wildlife Service. So back in August, there was a court ruling by Judge Malloy who relisted all wolves in the Northern Rockies, largely because of one state's management plan wasn't seen as appropriate or lining up with what the government believed were the standards. And so they want to manage that population as an entire region rather than individual states doing it. And so just as of the last couple days, Idaho, or the last week or so, Idaho exchanged wolf management back to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and said if the government is going to manage it, they're going to manage it. So that's kind of what's going on there. I think that's that's kind of the update. I mean, if you all follow that, you know that daily there are post newspaper stories, that sort of thing, and I would love to say that I sit and read every single one of them, but the reality of being an administrator is that you read a lot of things, but not always what you want. So.
Well, Jerritt, I would just say that, this advocacy question is an interesting one, and it's one that climate scientists are dealing with now, because their data is typically distorted by opposing points of view.
Right.
And I think they've come out and made a decision that they're going to become, at least some of these people are going to become strong advocates for their position, which is the climate is changing due to the effects of man. And I think, you're in a similar position with wolves because it's a hot button issue, an emotional issue for a lot of people, and I think the facts get distorted.
Yep.
I don't know how that affects the center, but it seems like you need to be prepared to defend what the science is anyway.
Yep, and I think if you look at just recently in the Minneapolis Star Tribune, I wanted to say St. Louis Post-Dispatch because I'm used to talking about where I used to live as being St. Louis. So, so Minneapolis Star Tribune, there was an opinion piece written by the Centers for Biodiversity, and they made some statements in there. Mary Ortiz, our executive director, wrote a letter talking about some of the factual statements they made that we believe were inaccurate. And so that's what we see our role as. We believe that there are plenty of advocacy organizations. And internally we have this discussion ongoing. And is there a time to advocate? Is there a time to stay out of it? And there are always good reasons for both, I believe. And so we've chosen to continue to work, to really concentrate on making sure that fact-based information gets out there, and then let other organizations do the advocacy. We believe strongly, and we had this conversation recently, that's why I feel pretty comfortable talking about this, we feel strongly that it's our role to get the information out and then let other organizations and other individuals do with that what they think is right. We believe that's how we can best serve wolf populations, both regionally, nationally, and internationally. So.
Do you find both sides using your information?
Yes. Yep. And I think that's one of the great challenges of putting accurate information out there but you have to let that play out. I really believe that. We could skew who we get information to, and if you're going to use it for what we think we would like, absolutely, here, have at it. And then if Steve wants to use it for evil, then we make sure that he didn't get it. But we can't do that. We want it out there, and then and this is more of a personal statement. I believe in the intelligence and the sort of the right-mindedness of of citizens and of people, and I think that will play out not just in wolf management issues, but overall, and because I think ultimately we get to the right place or somewhere close to it. I think is probably.
It seems like people are so